No free-for-all today. We'll take calls to Davis. Good morning. First today, we're going to go to a specific scene at the international border crossing at Point Roberts. These are the feet of Peter DeZordo. He cannot cross that line to get his car. It's gone forever, and it could happen to you. And we'll tell you about it later in the program. Yesterday, I was down at the Truck Loggers Convention in Vancouver, and many of them are biting their nails and tearing their hairs about the economic prospects for 1986 in the logging business. The little guys who work as market loggers and also are contract loggers for the big TFL holders. And they're worried witless that when the IWA negotiations come up again this year, there could be another increase. And I want you to hear what a man who's already been squeezed out of the business, Pete Rennie, has to say about that prospect.
Well, the IWA is going to have to take into consideration the sad state of the industry, and that there's a lot of the contractors particularly that can't stand another increase. There's going to be more of Jack Monroe's boys out on the street.
And already Pete Rennie, who logged at Spasm, he had made a little deal. The deal collapsed for various reasons you'll hear about, and he quit after 50 years in the logging business. Now, you're going to meet for the first time on the Webster program Dr. Please forgive me, Dr. David Strangway, who is the new boy on the block at the University of British Columbia. I think without fear of contradiction, the most difficult educational position in British Columbia at this moment. Dr. Strangway went to school in a one-room schoolhouse in Angola in Africa. He was one of the men who planned the sites on the moon for NASA. And after doing that kind of job, trying to bring UBC back to its feet and its stature should be a piece of moon rock. And in the program today, too, is that somewhat turbulent and somewhat rebellious, but still a party member of Social Credit, Jack Davis. He's a man who thinks that pump priming with the big mega projects can save our skins. But first, Dr. Strangway and his problems and our perceptions after the break. You all remember when Dr. Peterson left in a cloud of dust and some confusion and a little bit of bad feeling here and there. The man who took over on November the 1st is Dr. David Strangway. Now, he comes to a university which has been in turmoil, I suspect, although we don't see all of the turmoil, because it's been under the gun for the last 3 or 4 years. Dollars and real values have been cut about 20%. Faculty's down 7%. Support staff is down 25%. A dozen faculty have been fired. And the first question I want to put to you is based on your thoughts about the cream of the crop. Do you have a plan in British Columbia at UBC to select students who will do well and weed out the others?
We would very much like to pursue that aspect, yes. We don't have the details of the plan, but I think that's what the university has already been doing. We're looking to get the best students into the University of British Columbia and those who can get the most out of what we have to offer.
But for a public university, is that not a snob, academic ivory tower attitude?
Of course it's a snob academic ivory attitude. But
that goes totally against the grain. Every Canadian's entitled to get to university if he can.
I'm not making that argument. There's lots of opportunities in British Columbia to enter into the educational system and to move into universities. We've got the college system and the college transfer programs, the university transfer programs, and there are several universities. So when you look at it, the situation is not the same as it used to be many years ago when there was really only one way into the university. Now there are many ways into the university system. So it's quite the opposite of a snob appeal. It's an opportunity in this system, in this province, to have many ways to enter into the university system.
For the best of the students to get in there by
That's
a testing and selective system.
That's exactly right.
Raising the standard. You know, it's not
That's
so long
exactly
since
right.
we had to give university students basic English classes when they came out of high school. How can you select the cream of the crop when they can't write a sentence?
That's always an issue, and that's not unique to British Columbia, Jack. That's an issue that I think we're facing all across North America. And that situation is a very common one, and it's one that I think the universities must begin to address and are beginning to address, and that's the issue we're talking about.
May I put to you what I perceive as a little fact? That one of the great faults of the University of British Columbia is it has been divided from the community. That somehow or other we don't get a feeling of what you might call involvement in affairs by the university. Have you perceived that difficulty yet?
Well, certainly I think there's an issue there. I don't think that people have tried to be uninvolved in the community. I think there have been many attempts. One of my commitments is to do everything I can to strengthen that involvement. And one of the reasons I'm here talking to you today is for exactly that. I think it's very important that the University of British Columbia do more and strengthen its activities in this area. Not to say it hasn't done a lot, but there's a lot more that we can and will be doing in the coming years.
Well, under the gun as it's been before you came, surely your student-faculty ratio makes it very difficult to produce a student of quality.
Well, Jack, if you can help me get that message across to the community so that we understand that and so that, all of our people understand that, we'll take care of that problem.
But do you accept that as a fact?
I accept that as a fact. That we have a real problem with the student-faculty ratio. We have not enough faculty members for the numbers of students we're trying to take care of. Again, it's a problem that is not unique to British Columbia or to UBC. It's a common problem.
But the financing problem is unique to BC. Is it not a fact that public universities are regaining their funding while there's no prospect whatsoever of you regaining funding in the immediate years ahead?
Well, I haven't accepted yet the fact that you said that the prospect of regaining is zero. I think there's a real prospect that we can represent and explain why we need the funding, and that's what it's all about.
Right now, you talk about a quality university. We all want to see it, but as the devil's advocate, how can you attract anybody when you used to be second or third on the salary levels in North America, right?
That's right.
Now you're what, 18th?
Now we're number 18 in the country, yes.
In Canada?
In Canada.
18?
Sure. Yes.
And your tuition fees have gone up how much?
Our tuition fees have much more than doubled in the last 4 years.
And we're the highest in Canada?
We're among the highest in Canada, and in many programs we're way above significantly above the other universities across the country.
Now, have you yet solved when Peterson left, there was still bickering back and forward between the faculty and Peterson about the tenure problem. We had always thought that there was a clear-cut tenure agreement. Have you solved the tenure problem? Can you fire professors who are no good?
We believe we have solved the tenure problem, and the tenure problem isn't just as simple as firing professors who are no good. We've always been able to do that. The thing is that what we now need to look at is really two issues about tenure. One is to be sure that people are not fired purely arbitrarily, and of course the other one is to ensure that we are enforcing the standards and looking at the questions of merit and reward for those who are doing well.
Layoffs of faculty on economic ground has always been fairly simple. If you wipe out a department, they've gone. Is that
That's
right?
never been fairly simple. No, it's always been difficult too. Just as it is in any other organization. It's always been difficult.
Supposing you scrape your budget, right?
Yes.
To get a prized guy from Harvard or McGill or whatever, and you give him a fancy salary and bring him up. Does he has priority in tenure? He'll stay there. If you had to lay somebody off, you'd lay off somebody of a lower merit, even with longer service.
I'm sure you're aware, Jack, that in the last few weeks we reached a new agreement with the Faculty Association, and it includes precisely those kinds of clauses in it, so that the people who are very good will be protected, and that we are not in a situation of moving to dismissals with respect to seniority alone.
Have you had a chance to analyze yet how much we've suffered from the brain drain because of what is perceived by academics as the wool hat attitude of the social credit government and the lower salaries here?
We have a significant number of people who are looking at other opportunities. We have a few people who have been given other opportunities and a small number of people who have left. My focus, however, isn't so much on the people who are leaving. It's the inability to bring in the new people, in effect. And I think in any university you're going to have a turnover of people. Your best people are always going to be attracted and being looked at by other institutions. So our problem is fundamentally to look at what I call the renewal aspect. We have got to be able to compete, not just to retain people, but more importantly, to be able to attract new people. Because we'll always lose some of our good people. Any good university will have their good people under constant pressure to be moving from one university to another.
Well, I mean...
It's a very competitive market, is what I'm telling you.
In other words, UBC faces a brain drain of its best people unless you get more money.
We have got to get into the competition. Simple as that.
That means you got to get more money.
That's what it boils down to.
What do you feel is the attitude of the government in Victoria?
As you know, I've been meeting with many of the cabinet ministers and deputy ministers and so on in the last few months since I've been here, basically to convey to them my sense of what the issues are facing the universities in British Columbia, and of course particularly UBC, but the issues are similar. What I have been finding is that there is an understanding of the issue. One looks ahead to see what's coming. But when we put it in the sense of the fact that we must compete in a very hot and fast-moving market, British Columbia universities have to have that ability to compete.
I'm going to take calls to Dr. Strangway, and I have a few more points to put to him, but you can call now if you like. Dr. David W. Strangway. Any moon rocks in your pocket?
I didn't bring them in my pocket, but we'll be moving them very soon from Toronto to my research lab here.
After the break. I suspect that what David Strangway, the new guy at UBC, is telling us that you don't intend to be the stereotyped academic in the ivory tower.
I intend to make a mix of it, Jack. I intend to as you know, I've had a lot of research and teaching and so on in my background, and I think that's one of the things that helps me to understand the issues. I've done it and I've been there. But I don't intend to continue to be that alone. I intend to do a lot of reaching out to the community and the kinds of things that I think have to be done in running a large institution. Not that I know a hell of a lot about it, but I got some impressions over the years that, for instance, you as a university president, you can't be a CEO. You can't be the chief executive officer and say, this shall go, that shall go, that shall stay, this shall go. Because you're facing what somebody once told me were warlords in the shape of a dozen deans. Is that fundamentally different than a large corporation where there are subsidiary companies with corporate presidents and so on, where there are in fact warlords that must operate to protect their individual turfs? I think there is more similarity between the universities, and I think the analogy of a CEO isn't too bad at all. Yeah. Nowadays, you know, in the management world, they don't just arbitrarily say this goes, that stays, and whatever. There's a lot of consultation and discussion and dialogue before those tough decisions are made. Now, we got to make them, but... What about money? I mean, money is the key to your improvement and of the university, is it not? I think there are two issues. Money, of course, is absolutely essential, but I think it's even more important to convince and to convey to people that the University of British Columbia is one of the very strong and outstanding institutions, and it's a real resource to British Columbia. And I think it's very important that we convey that message and that we have a quality institution, and that's the kind of place we are. And if we can convey that and have people understand it, then we're going to go on the path about the money. And your selection and weeding out of the best of all the students from all the subsidiary educational structure is really one of your targets. I believe that that's the way the University of British Columbia ought to go. Now, While giving opportunities through evening courses, part-time courses, reach out. There's lots of ways that we can reach out to the community with our teaching programs too.
Now, tenure is supposed to give, and does give, academic freedom.
Absolutely.
We don't hear much speaking out by tenured leaders of the community at UBC. Now, maybe I'm prepared to concede it may be the fault of the media, which just doesn't look at UBC. Can your tenured professors take strong political positions in opposition to the government without you trampling on them?
Of course they can.
Freedom of speech for professors.
I think is very crucial.
And that's what they're guaranteed.
Yes,
Why don't they use it?
Well, I think they should use it a great deal more, and I think that's one of the points that I'd like to get across. I think they are using it more than they ever used to, but at least in the last few years. But I think it's very important to use this privileged position to speak out and talk about real issues.
Mind you, I won't make the converse point that many of the media, especially the print media, if you do something good, they won't run it. Anyway, but that's beside the point.
I happen to have noticed that. It's only if it's controversial that it gets
Nothing
the coverage.
positive.
Yes.
Now, what about the Universities Council? It always seemed to me just to be a kind of subsidiary arm of the government which does what it's told. Is that what the Universities Council is? People who get the money?
The Universities Council, I think, is looking for its role in the system. And it's my hope that the Universities Council will become much more of a body that speaks out and takes the initiative to say this is what's needed for the province of British Columbia.
Oh, you mean that they would say to the government and the public, look, this is impossible. We can't have good universities unless we get X dollars.
I think that's the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is they might say a few things to us that we might not like to hear.
You may well have whole faculties that should go.
Well, I could have, but I don't know of any yet. But you tell me about them.
I don't know. I mean, you're the guy in charge. You're going to have to find out. Let's take, we have time for some calls. Go ahead to Dr. Strangway.
Hello. I just think that it's rather interesting, some of the points that are being made today, especially that you are admitting that you're willingly weeding out people, which is creating a more privileged university. In the last few years, you've said that you've doubled tuition fees, which means that those who can pay are those who are able to go to school. And I think that in some ways it's rather pathetic, but yet rather obvious that that would be happening in this province with the support that you'd be getting from the Bennett government. And I just want to say that I really don't think that it has a good community benefit, that only certain people are able to go to higher education with the better faculty, and I really disagree with the direction UBC is going.
One correction I must make. It was not Dr. Strangway who doubled the tuition costs for the students at UBC. That's been growing for a number of years. He's faced with that fact. What you don't like is the cream of the crop.
That's right, and I think that the cream of the crop are those people, well, it's obvious, who can afford to pay to go to school. I realize that it's not this president's fault that the tuition is increasing, but it's still, that is a fact, and also that the student grants have been cut back. And it's obvious, those people who can afford to go to school, who don't have to put more time in, like, secondary jobs and things like that.
You made the point, ma'am. Have you a response to it?
Certainly I've got a response. I think that's a very real issue for universities everywhere. It's going on all across Canada in many similar ways. It's particularly aggravated in this situation because the combination of tuition fees plus the the inaccessibility of grants, it makes it extremely difficult. What I'm talking about is not a university in which only money is what gets you, and I think quite often we confuse that. What I'm talking about is a university in which the best students and those who can profit the most from the activities of the university have an opportunity to get in, and I think we need to look at things.
It's the same thing, though.
Okay, ma'am, I've got to leave you there, and I'll be back with more questions and calls to Dr. Strangway after the break. November 1st, you started at UBC, Dr. Strangway.
I've just passed my second anniversary, Jack.
Do you have tenure or do you have a contract?
I have a contract, but I also have the ability to go back and teach when the contract's over.
Oh, so you have both?
I got both. I got the best of both worlds.
6-year contract, and when you step aside, you can go back and teach.
Gives me the freedom to speak out and say whatever I like, even to you, Jack.
Oh, dear. Go ahead, please. What are you?
Yes.
That's you, sir.
I would like to hear a little bit about the background of the doctor in the industry of education.
Can you give a capsule background? Born in Simcoe, Ontario, 34, medical missionaries, the son of?
Yes, carried right on from there. I went to university at the University of Toronto some years ago, many years ago now. I have been teaching in universities I guess, ever since 1960, and I have taught at the University of Colorado, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and the University of Toronto, and I've been a visiting professor at the University of Houston when I was living in Houston for a few years.
That was when you were invited to join NASA in 1970, NASA as a civil servant.
That's right, that's right. And while I was there, I did some teaching. Subsequently, I've been a department head, an academic vice president, and I filled in as a president for a year before I came here.
And as chief of the geophysics branch of NASA, you picked some of the sites on the moon.
Did a little of that too, that's right.
Land here, land there.
That's right.
Anything else you want to know?
Yeah, some of your thoughts and plans on working with the student council at UBC.
Oh, I found already very good relations with the student council. One of the things that's very unusual about the University of British Columbia as far as the students are concerned is they're so well organized. They've got this very good AMS group, and I'm extremely impressed with the responsibility that they adopt and take with respect to many issues. So what I see, of course, is working very closely with them and with the other student bodies and being as accessible as the timetable permits to them to compare and talk about issues.
Great. Thank you very much.
You might have made a friend there. Go ahead, please.
Hello, yes, Dr. Strangway, I agree with you in that the students we should be trying to get into the university are the best, that have the best potential, not necessarily those that have the money to get into university. And by your definition, I think you were right on that point. The other aspect that does worry me, though, are there are several departments that have had retirement that has not been replaced. One that you may be familiar with is the Department of Geological Sciences. I was wondering what you're planning to do about that.
Well, of course, I'm quite familiar with the Department of Geological Sciences because that's my own home department, in effect. And while I won't have much time to spend there, I'm quite aware of the situation. I think what you're getting at and what you're describing, of course, is the situation we face. As we get retirements, we've had to use them for budget cuts. What we have to look at is the competitive ability to bring in the new young people who are going to be the replacements for the retirements. So every time you get a retirement, if you've got to throw it up and give it up as a budget cut, you don't get the renewal and you aren't in the competitive position. So I think you're describing exactly the problem that we face.
And depends on money.
And it depends on money.
Thank you, caller. Go ahead from Galliano.
Hello, Jack.
Yeah.
Just a personal note. I'm related to Dr. Strangway. One of his grandparents and one of my grandparents were brother and sister. But did it come up that Dr. Strangway's father was a medical missionary in West Africa? And incidentally, his recorded genealogy goes back to the 1600s in Scotland. He's more Scotch than you are, Jack.
Thank you, sir. We don't need any more of your personal.
Yes.
1600s.
Well, I knew I had a lot of Scotch in me, but that's...
Well, I personally stopped drinking 2 years ago. Go ahead, please.
Dr. Strangway, what is the enrollment now at UBC? How many thousands?
Well, there are many different ways of counting, but there's approximately 25,000 full-time students at UBC.
I was out there when there was 8,000. We thought that was unusual, ridiculously high.
Well, UBC is now one of the very large universities in Canada, and it's typical of many of the North American universities, which are this size or even much larger.
Well, I'm glad that we got a good science man in charge, Doctor. I'm prejudiced, you know.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask Dr. Strangway what he means by best students, if he could give more clarification on that, please. And then why the public should support this type of institution.
Well, I think the best student, I guess one of the earlier callers made the point that perhaps more effectively than I had made it, which is that those that have the best potential, and it's very difficult to assess that. There are many, many criteria that one needs to use, and I think we need to take a look at that. How we're going to do that, I don't think I can give you, the details yet, but I think it's a real issue for us to address.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'll ask my question and then hang up for the answer. I'm not a student. I recently became aware of the Coalition Against Sexism on campus. Dr. Strangway, what is the university and what are you going to do about the sexual harassment on campus as covered recently by the province and CBC Radio concerning the engineer department's display and parade of a nude woman on campus?
Well,
thank you. Now, let me get that straight. She objects to the engineer's Lady Godiva. You have a coalition against sexism on campus, and she's appalled by the sexism which permeates the campus. Now, it's a serious call.
It's a serious call. It's a serious call, and it's a very serious issue, in fact. I, in fact, am absolutely adamantly opposed to the nude lady riding on the Lady Godiva. I am, in fact, myself an engineer, and I simply think it's the wrong message and the wrong symbol for these times.
Strangway wants to cover up Godiva.
You got it.
Eh?
You got it.
And have you told the engineering, what do you call them, engineering club this yet?
Let's say it's under discussion.
Okay, but you've got it direct from Dr. Strangway this morning. Stop your childish sexist nonsense with Lady Godiva naked and horseback. I didn't realize that. Dreadful thing.
You said it so much better than I could, Jack.
In your name.
Yes.
In your name. Go ahead, please.
I was wondering if
Yes?
we can subsidize the academics with athletic scholarships like the Americans do.
Subsidize the academics with athletic scholarships.
Well, you know, I never quite thought of it in the terms that you put it, but I think as we get our programs at the university well defined, and as we get our message clearly articulated, we're going to be going to the community of British Columbia to talk about fundraising and support. And one of the things we might be talking about is ways in which we can get a little help for some of the stars and some of the outstanding people on our faculty. So I think, you know, I wouldn't have put it in your terms, but I think what you're saying is...
You're not against athletic scholarships for faculty or students?
I didn't call it athletic scholarships. I think he means the equivalent concept, picking outstanding people and giving them support from other sources.
Oh, you mean academic scholarships?
I believe that's...
Support.
I believe that's...
Is that right?
I believe that's the point he was making.
Well, we'll take it as the point he was making. Now, a call from Victoria. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
I just wanted to support Dr. Strangway's attitude towards pre-selection of student prior to entrance to university. I'm a graduate of UBC, but my primary schooling and part of my secondary schooling is in Scandinavia. And even at the age of 14, we were selected on an academic basis to enter university. And I think that there has to be some pre-selection going on in view of the fact that, you know, there has to be some the brightest and most potential students to be selected.
Thank you, sir. Now, there we'll have to leave it today. Unless you want to say
I just wanted to make
that?
a point on that. I agree with you, but I would add that British Columbia has an extra dimension, and that is the ability for people to come back into the system by coming through the college systems or many ways. So you never have to feel that the door is absolutely closed. There's always a way back into the system, and that's the strength of the British Columbia system.
Best of luck, Dr. Strangway. You will need it.
Thank you very much.
My thanks. Next, the Truck Loggers Convention after the break. Every year for more than 20 years, or almost every year, I've come down to Truck Loggers Convention at the Bayshore in Vancouver. And in previous years, there was more ebullience than I see this year. And little wonder with about 18,000 fewer members of the IWA, and goodness knows how many associated jobs down the drain in the state of our economy in British Columbia. I just wanted to be cheery. Mr. Hanuse, can you come over here, please? This is Dan Hanuse, who is the new president. Will be of the Truck Loggers Association, right. And he logs at Cheslakey. Where's that?
Nimkish Valley, the mouth of the Nimkish Valley.
Vancouver Island.
Vancouver Island.
And this is Cliff Coulson from the salmon capital of the world in Port Alberni. Is that right?
That's correct, Jack.
Coulson Prescott Logging.
That's correct.
Now, I'm pessimistic about the year ahead. You must be too.
Yes, in a way, yet I think we have to look ahead rather than backwards. I think we can turn it around by our theme of our convention.
Which is what?
Well, is that through partnership and cooperation with one another. It can be worded many ways, I guess.
But I have the feeling that the truck loggers are the low guys on the totem poles, that the industry in British Columbia is still held in a stranglehold of the big boys who are not nearly as efficient as they could be.
Well, I think that's true in some cases, and I think it depends where you've been. Most of British Columbians are fairly new to British Columbia, and they don't realize what had happened in the tenure system going back almost 40 years ago when the Act was changed. to accommodate the tree farm license sustained yield system.
Listen, Mr. Coulson, you've got a tree farm license.
Not a tree farm license, Jack, a forest license. There is a difference. I own a forest license in the Toquart Valley, a chart area. I managed to purchase several small operators over the years and formed a forest license, formed a timber sale harvesting license, which was rolled into a forest license.
How many people did you employ last year in your Coulson Prescott logging?
Between 50 and 60, Jack.
How many will you employ this year?
The same amount.
But you market your own log?
That's correct.
You're a market logger?
I'm a market logger, one of the vanishing breed, Jack.
You're not a market logger, are you?
No, I'm a contractor, and we hope to cut more wood this coming year.
For the tree farm license holder?
That is correct, yeah.
But aren't they pretty rough on you? Don't they make you carry the increased costs and put the pressure on you?
Well, we've had to take our share of the tough times. Yes, that's true.
Let me talk about exporting logs. I was down in Tacoma. You see thousands of Japanese cars, mountain of logs, all going to Japan, I presume.
I presume that's right, Jack.
Are you doing your best to export all the logs you can?
Jack, we're exporting enough logs to keep our operation running. We sell pulp logs at about 50% of the cost of production, because that's the local market for pulp logs. There's a low-grade log, there are cedar logs that sell for anywhere up to 90 to 100% of our cost of production with no profit. If we can't export a percentage of our logs, we cannot operate.
Jack Webster, Don Edwards. Edwards and Associates Logging, where's that?
It's up in the Queen Charlotte, Jack.
Oh, in the heart of the storm, eh? No. And Pete Rennie, where are you logging, Pete?
Spuzzum I was.
What do you mean you were? You haven't retired. You're obviously too young for that. What happened to Pete Rennie logging?
Well, we were squeezed on the amount we could produce, on the price, and we weren't going to log. Then the crew said that they would work for less, so we started on that basis. Then the IWA said that can't be done, laid charges to the Labor Relations Board. Labor Relations Board said you're going to pay back the reduction, and we stopped.
Let me get that. First of all, you were squeezed by who? The TFL holder?
Western Forest Products.
And how much did they squeeze you?
Well, they cut my production by 25%, which increased a lot of my cost by 33%.
And did they reduce your take or increase your costs? By doing that, they did.
They increased my cost by reducing my cut, and then they reduced the amount they were going to pay me.
The second pressure was from?
Well, by reducing the price, that was the second pressure.
And then you made a deal with the IWA?
I made a deal with my crew.
To take a what cut?
They were going to take a 6% reduction in wages.
How many men were involved?
35.
35 jobs, which might have been there yet.
Yes, that's right. They would be there.
But when the IWA big boys heard about it, they said none of that.
That's right, and they took it to the Labor Relations Board.
And you lost the case at Labor Relations Board?
Yeah, that's right.
And you closed down?
That's right.
When did you close down?
We were all finished the end of September.
Are you not going to open again this year at all?
No, there's no chance.
How long had the Rennie logging been up at Spuzzum?
We'd been in Spuzzum 7 years.
How long have you been logging in British Columbia?
50 years.
Well, you're not kind of sad about the state of the industry?
I am very sad about the state of the industry.
What would you do to improve the state of the industry?
I think we need cooperation, far more cooperation between the Ministry of Forests, the major TFL holders, and the contractors.
You're in the Queen Charlotte,
yes?
But you're not in Lyle Island, you're up in Graham Island.
We're up in the Good Island at Graham Island, right.
So you're a contract logger for whom?
For McMillan Modell.
How many men do you employ?
About 80.
And will you be steady all through next year with 80?
We hope to, as long as the markets remain where they are right now, yes.
Yeah. Are you a little bit nervous about the land claims and the road blockades and all this jazz?
Naturally, yes, sure we are. I mean, if things go through as the way they seem to be on the Moresby Island, why, I would imagine the next step would be to as what the natives have said, they would lay claim to Graham Island.
They've said that?
Well, in their conversation, yes.
The real nub of the problem in the entire forest industry are the wages, I'm told. And you'll remember nearly 5 years ago when the big boys, FIR, handed out a really handsome 2-year contract with a 13% increase and a 15% increase. And then it came to 0.04.5. And the contract's up for negotiation this year. Gentlemen, I'm going to go first to you, Cliff.
Right, Jack.
Were you one of the guys that agreed to the 13 and 15% increases 4.5, 5 years ago? Were you consulted on that?
We weren't consulted, Jack, but we are members of FIR and they're signatory to the Coastmaster Agreement.
Oh, so you willingly paid it?
No, we didn't willingly pay it. We were paid that under duress because we had no alternative.
You were members of the association. What do you mean under duress? You could have said no.
We are not able to say no, Jack. We're too small a segment. We don't have enough to say in the operation of FIR. There should be a separate agreement for small contractors, for small loggers. It's handled through FIR and the major companies who handle all the manufacturing plants, and they'll do handstands before they'll shut down a manufacturing plant over any issue in negotiations.
Yeah, well, you were involved in this too, weren't you, Pete?
That's right, I was.
And you finally got nailed on trying to get a wage cut.
Yes, and I stood up at the meeting when they presented this with the increases, and I said, there's no way that we can stand this.
All right, well, look into that camera and tell Monroe, my old buddy, and FIR, Keith Bennett and the boys, what they should do this year.
Well, the IWA is going to have to take into consideration the sad state of the industry, and that there's a lot of the contractors particularly that can't stand another increase. There's going to be more of Jack Monroe's boys out on the street if we get forced into increases like we've had this past 5 years.
In fact, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you had arranged an under-the-table 6%, right?
It wasn't really under the table, but they made it appear that way and forced the...
well, let's say, don't blame Monroe for it. You guys are both... I'm kind of blaming Monroe, but it's not Monroe. It was FIR, Macmillan Bodell, and the big boys to blame, wasn't it?
I agree, Jack. I agree that it was out of our hands.
That's right.
Now, Don, how do you feel about that? You work for one of the big boys. Do you think you need a new system of wage negotiation to give the truck loggers a different deal?
Well, it certainly can't carry on the way it is there, Jack, where a certain segment of the industry in total call the shots there for everyone. And because they have plants in excess of $750 million here, they're going to keep those operations going.
Regardless.
Regardless, Roger. And as far as the woodworkers are concerned, sure, what can you expect there? They're going to go after everything they can get there.
Not their fault.
When you can see the service industry is getting just as much of an increase, if not more.
Yeah, of course, that's not right. Anyway, there's been an imbalance in wages between the guys in the woods and the civil servants for years.
I agree, Jack, that the service industries have led the way in setting wages when the base industries should set the lead, should take the lead in setting...
Can you stand another wage increase this year?
No, I cannot.
You? Well, you don't...
No, but if I was there, I couldn't. No way.
How about you?
No, but one of the main things, Jack, is they've got to give you more flexibility in the workforce. A 10-hour workday, a 40-hour work week before there's any overtime. And without that type of flexibility, such as the Americans have, we're just out of luck.
The negotiations begin, I think it's June 15 when the contract, used to be no contract, no work by the IWA. I don't think it'll be that attitude this year somehow or other. Next, we're going to talk to a seer for social credit, Jack Davis, the man who wants to prime every pump within reach, after the break. A number of years ago, Jack Davis, social credit, North Vancouver Seymour, was C.D. Howe's economist, an economic advisor. C.D. Howe was a great tough guy in the old Saint Laurent days. Yes. Saint Laurent days. Yeah. So you look at the economy of British Columbia, and you're taking the classic position that social credit is doing us proud by pushing ahead with uneconomic mega projects. Is that correct, Jack Davis?
No, what I said in this little memo in front of you was that the private sector and the feds and the BC government together are going to be spending more on big projects in the next few years than they spent in the last few years. And therefore, there's life after Expo, and it's probably going to be a good life. That's really
and this will all largely be public debt life. It'll be priming the pump life, like ALRT, like much of Northeast Coal, like the Coquihalla. Yeah. Incredible weight of debt on the back of the taxpayers.
No, I'm saying really the opposite. In the last few years, it's been largely BC government money, or government-inspired money. In the next few years, it's going to be largely CNR, CPR, oil company, etc. money that's going to be priming the pump. So as far as the BC taxpayer is concerned, the debt burden isn't going to increase as much as it has in recent years.
And you think if all these projects, some of which are still dreams, come true, we might remain at 14% unemployed?
I think if all of those go ahead, we're going to see a substantial drop in unemployment. The biggest single bad news item of recent years is that BC Hydro stopped building. BC Hydro is the biggest corporation in Western Canada. It had the biggest investment in the province by far, and it stopped building 3 or 4 years ago.
But BC Hydro had to stop building.
Oh, it had to, Jack. I'm only saying what happened. And now BC Hydro will, in the next few years, start up in a slow way, but it'll start back into the act again. But the big news is CNR, CPR, liquefied natural gas, and so on.
Well, let's take these one at a time, and let's talk about the Northeast Coal Project. I think ordinary people were glad to see the Northeast Coal Project go ahead, but it's been such a litany of misery and disaster, a near-bankrupt quintet, and the Southeast Coal, that great purchase by your beloved government from Kaiser Resources, slipping slowly into the marsh, that people have lost enthusiasm for Northeast Coal. Is it, in fact, doing us any good whatsoever just now?
The one good aspect of Northeast Coal is really the railway artery out to Prince Rupert and the new docks there. Not only BC, but Alberta, Saskatchewan have a big new port area developing. In other words, supplementing Vancouver. So from a transportation point of view, it was overdue. It's now a good thing. But I wouldn't have invested as much government money in the Northeast Coal Project.
You're talking about what the civil servants call the infrastructure.
Well,
$1.5 billion of public money went in there to supply coal at good prices to cheap prices to Japanese.
Well, now the province didn't put all that up. The province put up roughly half of that, and half of it for a railway, which will be doing a job for the next 100 years. So it isn't wasted in the long-term sense. It's a bit early, but it did prime the pump for that transportation artery from the Yellowhead Pass right through to Rupert. And the CNR is double-tracking that, and that's part of the good news of investment for the next few years, the CNR contribution. The CPR contribution will all be new to us.
Is that firmly committed?
Both of those are firmly committed. There alone is more money going into the economy and investment than Northeast Coal, ALRT, and Expo combined. And on top of that, liquefied natural gas is probably going to go, which means a pipeline across the province and a big plant at Rupert. And I hope, Jack, a new ferry crossing to Vancouver Island.
Well, we'll come to that in a minute.
Like
Liquefied natural gas. How many times have I seen stories in the paper and heard them on the air saying that the liquefied natural gas project won't go ahead because the Japanese won't sign firm contracts?
You say
half a dozen times I've...
Oh, at least I was going to say a dozen.
A dozen times.
Yes.
So that's kind of pie in the sky. Why do they want liquefied natural gas from British Columbia if we can get it by the environmentalists at all?
Oh, we'll get it by the environmentalists. They want it because they're worried about the Middle East. The Japanese are so dependent on the Middle East, they'd like to have other sources, and Western Canada now has a great surplus of natural gas. The crux of it essentially has been price. At what price?
Well, that might be 5 years down the road.
No, I think within the next year or so there'll be a final announcement on that one.
And now, in total reverse of all social credit dogma,
yes,
it seems that we're going to build, very probably, Site C
yes,
purely to provide jobs, even if it's not an economic proposition, so we can export electricity to the States. Now, that case has not been proven yet as good for British Columbia, has it?
It hasn't been proven, but you say contrary to social credit dogma.
Yeah.
Well, remember W.A.C. Bennett had the two-river policy, not one river at a time, but two. So, in a sense, it's in the trend of that kind of history, to build ahead of the market. And
can you sell electricity at sufficient of a price to recapture not merely the market value of the power, but the cost of, God knows, $4 billion probably for Site C Dam?
Well, I only put $2 billion in there in my numbers, but I see numbers now like $3 billion, so it's a very large number. The amount of power isn't incredible. It isn't as large as some of our other projects of recent years, and we would have to export most, if not all of it, in the first few years to get revenue. But the Revelstoke Dam has been finished. It's been largely surplus, but we've been able to sell its output, and last year we got $300 million.
Only because of a particularly dry season in the Northwest. The water was down.
Yeah, but remember, in the Northwest in the U.S. now, they're in such trouble with their nuclear power plants, etc. Okay, but they're not able to run them, and they've spent tens of billions. We're talking about 1 and 2 and 3 billion. They've spent tens of billions on nuclear plants that aren't operational. And so they're in real trouble, and they'll take our power at some price, and that price can be much higher than it used to be.
Except for one factor. Now, you were with BC Hydro at one time.
BC Electric for 5 years, yes.
BC Electric. And you and I both went through all the convolutions of the Columbia River treaties and the two-power policies.
I was one of the authors of I was the author of that item which now sees us bringing back more than the Site C project of power generated in the States shortly. So
in other words,
that's for sale too in the States.
When the Columbia River Treaty comes up after its 30 years, which will be in the 1990s.
Early 1990s.
We, British Columbia, are entitled to take back at the border.
Yes, from U.S. generators.
A vast amount of power.
That's right.
And yet at the same time, we're shortly going to be trying to sell them power from a new dam.
More power.
Doesn't make much sense.
Well, except that the Americans have become accustomed to using the power that's off their own generators, and they're going to have to build down there to replace it. So let's leave it down there as long as the price is right.
But you're telling me the price of the power, the price of the power on Site C, which would certainly supply a hell of a lot of construction jobs.
Yes.
Could that include the cost of construction of the dam?
Oh, it has to, Jack. It has to. Now, the Americans are spending a lot for power now. Per kilowatt hour, it's a high price. And we can come in with an average price that's below their costs, their prices. We can come in with an average cost below their prices. This has to be demonstrated. I'm not saying take this all on faith. There has to be public hearings and so on. But I believe that the economics of a Site C project are in place.
Still no sign of any reasonable secondary industry, is there anyway, except in the lumber industry?
No. Well, we build a lot of the bits and pieces for ALRT out of our own factories, which was on the plus side. We can do some of those.
I have a couple more questions for Jack Davis, but I want your calls. And you can tell him what you think of his beloved government after the break. In your list of pump priming, you include one here which interests me. The new short ferry crossing to Vancouver Island, $150 million. You're going to raise all that fuss and furor again by linking Vancouver Island with that untouchable beauty spot, Gabriola.
Well, not only that, Jack, the wrecked beach enthusiasts are going to be upset with a ferry terminal on the mainland end near the University of BC, Point Grey. But I contend it'll improve the beach. If you put a proper causeway out there, they'll have a much larger beach. It'll be much more accessible.
But that's dead in the water. This is Jack Davis's pipe dream, isn't it?
Well, Jack, it's economic, so it can't be dead in the water. And if I was writing social credit, if I was writing social credit policy for the next election, I'd be promising this 1 hour crossing across the Strait of Georgia for Vancouver Islanders. I think it, well, first of all, it would make much better use of our existing ferries. You wouldn't have to add more ferries. You'd simply turn them around every hour instead of every 2 hours.
You mean the ferries that we sold and leased back from the people in the East?
That's right. Might as well have
that was your idea, was it?
That's right. I started it, yeah. What it is a banker that charges a lower rate of interest. That's all I mean.
But, you're telling me that the 1 hour run to Gabriola would go from Point Grey?
Point Grey to Gabriola, right? Yeah.
The
Nanaimo people are all for it.
Gabriola people are
50-50. Right, yes.
And the Point Grey people are think of what it would do to property values, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, but there's no residential property anywhere near this terminal. Remember, it would take off from the extension of Marine Drive into the university, would drop down the bank and then run out at sea level.
Well, Gallardi talked about that 25 years ago.
That's right, and he was a prophet ahead of his time.
No comment. But I noticed you don't put in the great social credit pie in the sky of the gas line to Vancouver Island, which they want Mulroney to kick in $500 million for.
Well, it's uneconomic.
You don't support your party in that?
Well, I support the party if Canada, Brian Mulroney, will give us the cost of the pipeline. In other words, we BC taxpayers don't have to pay for it. But otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
But that pipeline is not an economic venture on its own
Jack,
feet.
it's not economic. It's going to be $750 million. We've just spent $1 billion to put power across, roughly from Powell River across to Comox, and it was predicated on electric space heating of everybody's homes and so on. Now we're going to build a gas line across to space heat all the homes with natural gas.
And there aren't that many homes on Vancouver Island.
Well, that's right. And let's wait. If there's an LNG project delivering natural gas to Prince Rupert, let's bring it down by barge and use it around Vancouver Island.
So the one piece of social credit expenditure which you really don't oppose unless the feds give it to us.
I think basically that has to be the province's policy. If the feds will pay for it, we'll take it.
Don't you think that if there were a reason, some kind of other alternative to social credit other than the NDP under Skelly, that Bennett would get thrown out in his ears in the election? Because of the resentment, the bad feeling, the education policies, the restraint, the unemployment. The towns have got 25–30% unemployment.
Yeah.
Don't you think if there were an alternative of any reasonable kind for the free enterprise?
I think Skelly's in trouble, and I think the Socreds would get more seats now if there was an election today than they have currently in the legislature.
But it has not been a good performance. Your government very much lacks a positive image, except for the carnival.
Well, you could say that the government shouldn't have talked so much about restraint, but it had to restrain expenditure in some areas. After all, it's been running $1 billion deficit each year, so it hasn't been restraining overall. It simply cut some programs in order to keep the budget within some reach of income.
I forget the direct debt figure. Is it 19 billion?
It's around 17 at the moment, yes. That's, of course, including Hydro's debt, the mortgage on the big dams, the mortgage on ALRT, the mortgage on the ferries, and so on.
You're an expert in ALRT. How many years before that begins to break even?
Mid-1990s. It'll be cheaper than buses.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just like to know if we're going to make so much money off of power, why aren't the rates to the householders going down?
Well, the rates to the householder reflect the total income of BC Hydro, and if BC Hydro can make more money by selling surplus power out of the province, then the rates to the homeowner are held at the present level, could conceivably decrease.
I just want to ask one other question. How does it feel to be part of an organization that's more embarrassing than the Vancouver Canucks? Thank you.
Well, I think the track record in terms of votes has been very positive.
That's a good track. I must feed that to Fotheringham. Where am I going? Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd just like to compliment Jack Davis for the very upbeat attitude towards the future of this province, and I want to ask him a question about ALRT. What's the potential for exporting ALRT and selling this concept to and making jobs this way? And how does Jack feel about the need for secondary industry, and where is the snag? Where is the holdup in getting better secondary industry? Is it unions? Is it the federal government, or what level are we having such difficulty in getting secondary industry started in British Columbia?
Well, first, the snag, it's traditional in BC, is that our wage rates have tended to be way above those in most other parts of the world, at least comparable to those in Ontario. And of course, our local market isn't as big as it is around Ontario, including Quebec and some parts of the US. That's the snag. Now, on ALRT, there's a real opportunity for sales. Now, we have built all the motors for the rapid transit system, and the same motors are being... it's a firm called Bennett and Emmett.
Bennett and Emmett.
In Richmond. Yeah. But those same motors are being used in Toronto, in the extensions in Toronto, which use the same equipment. They're being used in Detroit, and would have been used for the new system in Los Angeles, but Los Angeles doesn't have any money to build a subway system. Yes, there's a great opportunity there, and that's just one example of manufacturing.
It's an Ontario development, and they were built in Ontario, the cars.
The Ontario government had to come up with a cheaper alternative to the conventional subway, and that's our system. They built it for themselves. We got the first large copy. Others are buying it. And it'll sell around the world, and Expo will help sell it. And it'll sell components like our motors around the world.
More with Jack Davis after the break. You're going to run again the next election, Jack.
Absolutely.
When is it?
When is it? Oh, less than 50-50 this spring, probably next spring. That's purely my personal...
Yeah, they couldn't have the gall to hold it during Expo, could they?
Well, the vibes are good.
You mean the gall is strong? What about the polls? Tell me what your party polls tell us.
I don't know. I don't know.
You sure, Witness?
But I'm just the vibes I get.
But you're in the caucus. I mean, you sure you don't know Witness?
Oh, yeah, but no, the polls aren't discussed in those terms.
He can't call it when Di and Charles are here. So it's either got to be before Di and Charlie or after Di and Charlie. And call it during Expo. Mind you, Expo's been very good. We've lost 30,000 $20 an hour jobs, and we're getting 8,000 or 9,000 $4 an hour jobs. Yeah. I mean, that's good, isn't it?
But Expo is nearly 2/3 sold out months before it begins, Jack. It's got to be a success. It'll probably make a profit.
That's a 40. What you're saying is that, we'll say that I've got in my briefcase 6 3-day passes.
Yes, yes.
That's down as 18 visits?
That's right.
Not necessarily 18 visits, is it?
I'm not sure it is, but I assume it is. Yeah.
Every purchase, every single day's admission.
Yes, yep.
I mean, you might
but
have
I've
10
got
million
people coming to visit me, none of whom have passes of any kind yet.
But you might have 10 million tickets sold and only 2 million at the gate.
Oh, but it's the ticket price. The money's in the bank.
Okay, that's right. Now,
who cares if they come?
Don't misunderstand me. I'm enthusiastic about Expo.
Okay.
We've got to be.
Yep. Are you a recent convert, Jack? Or
No, since last fall I made a decision.
No, it'll be a great success.
Gotta be. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
From Nelson, BC.
Yeah, an excellent man you got there, Jack Webster. 3 quick questions. One to do with downstream benefits that you were talking about, Jack.
Yes.
A couple of numbers come to mind. That there's 450 megawatts at Cooley alone, which should be giving back to us somewhere in excess of $500 million per year. Are those numbers right? And I think there's the same amount below Cooley on the other 6 dams.
There's roughly 1,000 megawatts available, and how do you and price it at some future cost of producing an alternative power in the U.S., and you've got hundreds of millions of dollars coming back to the province, and that's power.
That's under the Columbia River Treaty downstream benefit.
That's power, mind you. The Americans are now using themselves.
Can't we reopen that thing in any way?
Oh, absolutely. We're free. 1992, I think it is.
Before.
Okay, but in the year or two before that date, to negotiate a new price.
And if we don't negotiate, we're technically entitled to bring the power back to the border.
And they must deliver it with new transmission lines free at the border.
Yeah. My understanding was it works out to over $1 billion a year that we're losing.
Well,
and that second question.
Yeah, okay.
Water below Libby.
Yes.
Will that ever be sold to the American Southwest? There's, 13 million acre feet there?
Possibly. Libby's always been a bit of a bit in limbo, because we have the right under the treaty to divert that water around the Big Bend. And so a negotiation will occur shortly after the year 2000.
I thought that right ended in 84.
Well, yes, but there has to be a negotiation, surely, with our good neighbors before we switch the water.
That could bring a lot of money if they ever do that. Is that right?
Well, what will happen probably is the water will remain in its present water course, but they're going to have to pay a big dollar to keep it that way.
Okay. Third question. I liked your letter in the newspaper about the Family Services Act. Would you care to comment a little bit further about that?
What was that? I missed it.
Well, child abuse. The focus is, of course, on children and the abuse of children. But there are instances of parents having their children taken away without any recourse. And that side of the problem requires a lot more consideration by human resources.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Very much.
On the subject of school teachers, it's quite shocking and appalling and horrendous that in a certain case where the guy peregrinated, if that's the word, from school board to school board and was under psychiatric treatment, nearly all of that time, not one person took the provisions of the Family and Children's Act to report non-maliciously on reasonable grounds to have him removed from the system. Not one. It would seem.
Well, the system looks after its own, and in that case it was purely education, and they didn't get human resources involved, and human resources didn't aggressively get itself involved.
It's got to be corrected.
Well, they've got to be melded. They are in some areas.
People have to carry out the responsibilities and
If we have a problem re a child, you can bet that human resources, education, and health are all ganged up against you. So they do cooperate in some things.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Regardless of who wins the next election, would your guests expect another round of restraint in government services, say for 87 to 1990?
Well, I tried to paint an optimistic picture re the total economy. If the economy of BC picks up, the income to the provincial government will grow, and as it grows, then restraint will be relieved.
But if right now, what are you predicting for the last 2 years of this decade? You're saying you're going to be optimistic.
I'm optimistic, and I think some of the ceiling, well, all of the ceilings will be raised somewhat. I don't know to what extent.
Thank you. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Yes, calling long distance. You asked the question, why can't we attract development? I think the two biggest obstacles, especially faced in the north in economic development, A, who owns the land, B, the environmental lobby, which is really big business.
You've hit it right on the nose.
And it's scaring the hell out of investors, and they won't come in. You look at the problems Kitfall faces with shutdowns. I've had mining companies in and say, no way, we won't touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Because of
somehow government has got to get the environmental issues spelled out so there's an organized manner in which they can be handled. Hopefully this advisory can do it, but my God, I have grave misgivings now about it.
And the land claims.
Well, the land claims have got to be settled. Nobody's going to come into the Charlottes here. They just won't come anywhere near us.
Why should they?
Well, I wouldn't either. But damn it, we got to do something about it.
Well, there's a chance you'll lose the logging industry up there. You know that as well as I do.
Hey, I'm fighting it every day.
Well, I drew the public's attention to it, and of course we can say to Mr. Davis that your government has sat on its hands since 1975 and not lifted a finger to tackle the problem of the Indian land claims.
The people that broke the law got fined $750. The people that obeyed the law paid $750,000 in penalties. Now, how is that ever just?
It's not.
Well, what are we going to do about it?
Let's ask Mr. Davis.
Well,
what are we going to do about it, Mr. Davis?
Well, first, the Indian land claims have been exaggerated out of all reason.
By the Indians?
By the Indians and by people who are always sympathetic to the underdog, regardless of who the underdog is. First, I personally don't think that any group should be given a special privilege in this country, including our native Indians.
I've got to keep to time this time because of my next segment. Jack Davis, thanks for coming here. Keep nagging everybody, will you, please? And I'll be back with Schneider after the break.
The border at Point Roberts is just like every other border into the United States. You gotta come through in the right way.
All right, sir, your citizenship?
Canadian.
Purpose of your trip to the United States today, sir?
Well, we're telling a story, and we're gonna be gone pretty quick.
All right, sir. You have any goods or merchandise you're entering the United States with this time?
None.
Have a nice day, sir.
And that's all there is to it. Now, if I had a criminal record, though, I could be in different shape, couldn't I?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir is right. Canadians with criminal records are definitely not welcome in the U.S. of A. Licenses are checked on this computer, and if border guards discover someone with a record trying to get in, he's turned away. If he tries again later, his vehicle will be seized for good. It's not just a theoretical possibility, it can actually happen. And if you're the wrong kind of person, it could happen to you. It happened to this guy, Peter DeZordo, right?
Yep.
Tell me what happened. You lost your truck.
Yes, I did.
You went across the border, you shouldn't have.
Yes.
And they took it.
Yes, they did.
Are they going to give it back?
No.
It's gone for good?
Yes.
Tell me how it happened.
4 months ago, I tried to cross the Sumas border to watch my friend race.
And they identified you as a criminal?
Yes, they pulled us over and checked our ID out, and I came up as a bad guy.
Well, were you a bad guy? What had you done? What was your criminal record?
B&Es.
B&Es. You were a bad character. How many B&Es?
3.
3. That was how long ago?
7, 8 years ago.
7 or 8 years, just a kid.
Yeah.
You're 25 now.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any trouble with the law in these last 8 years?
No, nothing.
So you went to the border, what happened? They told you you couldn't come in?
Yes.
Because of your criminal record?
Yes.
And what did they tell you then?
They said if you try and cross another border today, we're going to seize that vehicle. So I didn't.
You took their warning?
Yes, I did.
But then you tried again in December?
Yes.
And they took your vehicle?
Yes.
Well, you were pretty stupid, weren't you?
Yep.
Well, did you think the Americans were just going to slap you on the wrist and let you go?
Well, I thought they might turn me around again, like they did at Sumas.
You thought they'd let you off with another warning?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't, did they?
No, they didn't.
And so now you're out of truck?
Yes.
For good?
Yes.
Can you ever get it back?
No.
It's gone. No. And you can't go to the United States, can you?
No, I can't.
I mean, this is the borderline right here.
Yeah.
If you go on the other side of the border, what would they take, your jacket or something?
They throw me in the caboose.
They'd throw you in the caboose.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be gone.
Mm-hmm.
So you've learned a lesson from this?
Yes.
A very expensive one. Was your truck important?
Yeah, it was. It was my work truck.
And now it's gone?
Yes.
Well, I think there is an important lesson here to be learned. The Americans are not kidding when they say that if they warned you not to come in, and you still do, they are going to seize your vehicle. Now, you can't go across, but I'm going to go across and talk to the American Border Patrol guy and see what he has to say about this. We'll see. You wait here.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Dahlstrom.
Yes, sir.
Mark Schneider, how are you?
How are you?
Now, you're the fellow who seized poor Peter DeZordo's truck, is that right?
No, the inspecting officers did the seizing.
Tell me, just because he's had a criminal record, even though it was 8 years ago, you're going to take his truck, is that right?
That's correct.
Why? It seems a little harsh.
Okay. Basically, when a person applies for entry to the United States, they must prove that they are admissible to the United States. And in this case, the subject has applied for entry in the past, and he has been told that he is not admissible to the United States.
He got a fair warning, in other words.
Yes, he did. And then besides the warning that he could not enter the United States, he was told what would happen if he did enter the United States.
It was all laid out in clear detail. He knew the consequences,
Yes,
what you're
he did.
saying. But, you know, it seems that the consequences are administrative. I mean, it's not as if he's found guilty. It's not
That's
as if...
correct. That's correct. It's an administrative thing. The action is taken against the vehicle and not against the individual.
Oh, so it's the vehicle that's offended. It
That's
just
correct.
happened to be in the custody of somebody who was a bad character.
That's not necessarily bad character, is that he had a passenger that was excludable to the United States as well.
Now, what happens to me if we brought this guy across the border here? Would you seize our truck just because we had a B&E artist in our van?
Okay, yes, it would be subject to seizure.
What happens if I picked him up on the road?
Same thing.
Well, that's quite interesting. No matter who it is, it's the vehicle that's really...
The penalty is assessed against the vehicle. Okay.
Boy, that's pretty devastating. That's quite surprising. Now, tell me, is there any appeal? Can that poor guy out there standing by himself now do anything to get his vehicle back?
Okay, he has filed a petition for mitigation, okay, which has been denied. Okay, and it was felt that the interest of justice would not be served and would diminish the deterrent effect of the act.
I see. If you seize my van,
Mm-hmm.
then I can appeal it in a sense. You call this a letter of mitigation.
Yes, okay.
And that was denied in his case.
And that was denied.
Is there anything else that he can do besides that now?
Okay, he can post a cost and claim bond for $250, and then he can have it reviewed judicially.
He can go to American courts.
Yes, he can.
And have to take the risk that he's going to be found innocent, but it doesn't sound like in his case, does it?
Okay, well, he will have to prove that the vehicle was improperly seized and that he has not been dealt with justly.
But that's unlikely in this case since he'd gotten his warning and he admits it.
I believe so.
So he'd just be out the $250, wouldn't he?
That's correct.
Can he ever get back into the United States?
Yes, he can. Okay, and that would be through filing a waiver of inadmissibility with the U.S. government.
And he has to fill out some kind of long form, I think, fingerprints, he needs photographs and all that?
That's correct.
Do you think you could explain it to him and see if we can get it straightened around with him?
All right.
Okay? You don't mind? How often does this happen? How many cars are seized?
Five vehicles in December.
Just 5 this last December at this one border station.
That's correct.
So altogether, across all the borders with Washington State, there must be a fair bit.
Yes, there are.
I take it you two have met each other. He's going to explain to you how you can get your truck, not your truck back, how you can get admissible back into the States, okay?
Okay.
Go ahead, explain it to him.
As I explained, and we gave you the forms earlier, that once the forms are completed on here, you can apply for your waiver of inadmissibility, and once it is granted, you'll be given a letter that you'll present at the border, and then you'll be free to cross the border.
Okay, is that okay?
Yep.
What about anything you want to ask him while you got a chance?
Can I get my tools back?
We'll see. We were given the opportunity. Remember when I told you we took you out to the car and says any personal items, and you went to take the tools, and you says, nah, heck with it, I'm going to leave them.
Yeah.
And you were given the opportunity.
Yes, because you people wouldn't give me a bag or anything to take them in.
Weren't they in a toolbox?
No, they weren't.
Did you ask for a bag?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I don't remember that.
Well, you were inside the office.
I doubt it, but I will check into it.
Okay.
So there's a chance he may, in fact, give him his tools back. Is that standard?
No, it's not.
It's not standard.
It would have to be an exception to the rule.
And you've learned your lesson?
Yes.
You'll never do it again?
No.
Or else he'll have to go through it all again, won't he?
Possibly.
My truck's gone, though.
Yeah, it's gone.
You guys aren't very nice people.
He still feels hard done by, but
well,
it's hard to blame you guys.
I don't. It's something we regret, but it was his decision to cross, and now he has to face the responsibility for his actions.
Well, thank you.
Okay. All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye now.
Oh, I can't help feeling a little bit sorry for Mr. DeZordo, but all of you are well and truly warned. If you've been told not to cross the border, don't attempt it until you have a waiver of your invisibility. My thanks to U.S. officials. I'll be back after the break. Tomorrow we have the Right Honourable Joe Clark, Minister of External Affairs in the Conservative government in Ottawa. And he should be good on the situation about Libya, terrorists, free trade, and South Africa. So Joe Clark, the Right Honourable Joe Clark will be here tomorrow morning. We're also doing a piece about the new central registry for missing children in Ottawa, and we're going to have somebody here from Child Find at 9 a.m. precisely.
Expo 86, 107 days to go.
The Right Honourable Joe Clark, External Affairs, at 9 a.m. precisely.